Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris. Let's just jump right into it. We left off of pages 110 through 130 of The Alchemist. And what a journey it has been, folks, through this book by Paulo Coelho. And it really feels like things are starting to heat up a little bit. If you guys remember, one of the big things that happened last time when we read pages 90 through 110 was the vision, and we'll call it an omen, because that's what I kind of consider it. And this is what the old king, the Salem king, told Santiago: the omens lead the way, right? And he saw these two hawks flying high in the sky. All of a sudden, one attacks the other. And then right after that, he has a vision of an army attacking the oasis. Very brief vision. And like I said, vision, omen, I'm going to say that's an omen because I think it's trying to tell Santiago something. Right? These are the omens that will lead him to his treasure. So I believe that this was an omen. You could refer to it as a vision as well. But he takes this vision, he kind of wonders what he should do about it. And then some of the advice that was given to him was, hey, go to the tribal chieftains. You got to tell them, the people that run the oasis. And so he goes and talks to them, and that's kind of right where we left off. It seemed like the chieftains were very angered that Santiago got this omen and nobody else did. They actually say, because I have the book open here, on page 108, 109-ish, why would the desert reveal such things to a stranger when it knows that we have been here for generations? So they're kind of upset that they didn't see this coming either, or they didn't see this coming themselves. Why would Santiago get this vision, this omen? And does this omen, seemingly it seems unrelated to the pyramids and the treasure, but did Santiago see it because the omen is trying to tell him something about his treasure? That's why he only sees it. It's just a theory. Of course, as always, let me know what you guys think. Let's start page 110, where we left off. This is kind of what we just talked about right here. He was getting nervous when he was talking to the tribal chieftains, and he kind of was starting to have regrets of telling them this. We see Santiago kind of have this, what I call regret. He doesn't want to share things with people. He thinks that he shared too much with the newcomer back in, gosh, where was that? Tarifa. Was it Tarifa? Back when he got his money stolen by that newcomer. And I don't think he wants to share anything anymore. He shared stuff with the gypsy. He says that he wish he didn't do that. He didn't really want to talk to the Salem king. He was too busy trying to read his book. He didn't even want to give him the time of day. So he's kind of at ease a little bit. And then immediately, let's flash forward to this meeting with the chieftains. Tensions arise, but then immediately he's at ease because one of the elders smiles at him. And Santiago thinks that this is a reference to the language of the world. And he starts to feel a little bit better. I mean, isn't this kind of how you would feel? You have these tribal chieftains talking probably in Arabic. They're not permitting him to leave. Remember that. He wanted to leave. And they said, no, you can't leave. And then one of the elders smiles at him, which is like a reassuring thing. For sure, if you're in Santiago's footsteps, first of all, this isn't your country. This isn't your land. You don't speak the language. You're not even from the oasis, not even from Africa, let alone the oasis. And one of the elders smiles at him. That's got to be pretty reassuring. And one of these elders then begins to speak. and he's telling Santiago a story about how 2,000 years ago, a man was thrown in a dungeon, sold as a slave. There was people in the oasis that were able to bring this man over to their land, man to land. Kind of sounds like a poem, but the merchants bought this prisoner and then they brought him seemingly to the oasis. The elder goes on to explain that this man was Joseph, same biblical figure that I believe is in the Bible, Old Testament, Genesis. And he goes on to explain that Joseph was the person that saved Egypt from famine. Lots of biblical figures, lots of very religious symbols in this book, as we have seen, throughout. We've heard characters talk about the Quran, the obligations to Islam, the 5 obligations, traveling to Mecca, various other. There was crosses in the gypsies' hut or house where she read and tried to interpret Santiago's dream. So lots of religious symbolism in this book. And I think Paulo himself is kind of a religious guy, just from reading one interview with him. But anyway, let's continue. Remember, where is the oasis? The oasis is right in the middle of the desert, Sahara. And the elder gentlemen, the chieftains, this guy makes a comment. The desert has taught us everything. Remember a couple episodes ago, we were talking about how when Santiago stared out at the desert, he was so silent. He couldn't even speak because of the vastness of it. Well, it's vast, it's big, and it's an incredible teacher. Maybe that's why Santiago was so silent. Because when somebody speaks, you listen. Especially when it's an elder, somebody of high expertise. When they're talking, you're not talking. Remember, there's a passage in the Bible from the Epistle of James. Slow to speak, swift to hear. I'll have to look that up again. It's something like that. Slow to speak, swift to hear, slow to speak. Slow to wrath. So these desert people, that's all they've known is the desert. Fatima talks about how she's used to people leaving into the desert, going, women in the oasis, rather, are used to letting men go out into the desert in search of their treasures and looking to the desert in hopes that they come back. The desert is its own way of life, completely different than the town that he was in, where he was at the bar, the newcomer, he got his things stolen. These people maybe are a little bit different, being that they live in a desert. It's the same thing, kind of like, and don't get me wrong, the oasis, it's described as being very, very, lots of traffic, lots of people, but it's very much its own community, kind of like a rural versus city, like New York City versus small town in Texas kind of vibe. Let's continue. The meeting continues, and the chieftains are still in the meeting with Santiago. The guy's still talking, and he is saying that the agreement that was made, that they learned about when they got into the oasis, about not being allowed to carry any arms. Remember that, and how there was other parts of that agreement, how the people of the oasis have to take us in and take care of us, but you got to give up your arms. Or remember, the Englishman had a gun that was kind of random. He never really said anything about it. But now the chieftains are going to say, okay, we're going to give people back their guns, and we got to fight the enemy that's coming. And we're going to give incentives to people who kill the attacking forces. All right. This wasn't. This was just some gold. I think they were giving away. Nothing too. Or maybe it was great. I mean, it depends. Back in the day, that was probably a good incentive. But no, it wasn't too much. It was some gold. I'm trying to see here. Soul of the Wind. I'm trying to read. Where was this? Anyway, Santiago gets kind of alarmed because he could very well die tomorrow. Very well die tomorrow with these new measures that are being taken. And then he kind of remembers something that the camel driver told him, that every day is there to be lived or to mark one's departure. Right? Now think about the words here. It's either lived or to mark one's departure from this world. He doesn't say die. A departure into something else is kind of what he's implying here. Again, this kind of harkens to the religious aspect of this book. Like you don't completely go away when you die. You just elevate to another higher, whatever you call it, dimension. Your soul goes out into the ether, maybe into the desert. And Santiago realizes he's not really scared about this. And maybe because he realizes what I was just talking about, that we don't really depart. We're never really gone. Santiago doesn't have any regrets because he's already done so much. He's seen way more than other shepherds, and he's proud of that. So now the battle is coming up, and mentally he's prepared for it, I think. Before we get to that, on page 112, something crazy happens. This horseman appears, and he's introduced to us on page 112. Santiago gets blown back by some wind. Huge thundering sound. I don't know what kind of, if this was like a thunderstorm or tornado, something like that, but he's rudely interrupted. And in comes this horseman on a huge white horse, falcon on his shoulder, turban, face completely covered, can't see his face, doesn't know who this is. And he sort of calls out Santiago. This guy's on a mission. He comes in on a mission of wanting to know who read the omen of the hawks. And he doesn't use the word omen. He says, who dares to read the meaning of the flight of the hawks? And he says it so loudly that it says that it echoes throughout the 50,000 palm trees of the oasis. And Santiago admits this to him. Yes, it was me. I did it, but I was trying to do it for good. I wasn't doing it for any selfish reasons like, hey, look at me, I can tell the future. I was trying to let these people know so they can get prepared. And the horseman's kind of an interesting guy. He draws out his sword, lowers it slowly on his forehead, he actually draws some blood from Santiago's forehead. And Santiago's so nervous at this point. He doesn't know what is going on. All of a sudden, this guy on a horse comes. His sword is drawn. He could very well die right here. He might not even see battle. I'm wondering how the horseman, though, knew to just show up at Santiago's doorstep, so to speak. It's like he knew prior to that Santiago was the guy who had the vision of the hawks. So that's kind of confusing, but in a way, maybe not. as we're going to see in a couple more pages here. So eventually the tension kind of eases. He doesn't cut off anything from Santiago. He withdraws his sword. He's just upset that Santiago would try to change what Allah has willed, he says. The future is there. You're not supposed to change it. That's for God. That's for Allah. And Santiago tries to tell him, everything has been written by the same hand. So if Allah wrote the future, Allah is writing Santiago's path, so to speak, as well. So if Allah didn't want it, he wouldn't have had Santiago see this vision. Basically, is what I'm trying to understand, is what I think Santiago is trying to reason with the Horsemen about. And Santiago admits he never saw the outcome. It's not that he's trying to change the outcome. It's only that he's trying to do the responsible thing and spread the vision of God. It's not to change the outcome. In fact, it might be to further the outcome, right? Because he didn't see who was winning or losing that battle when he saw the army and the Hawks attacking each other. He didn't see if the scoreboard of who won or who lost, but maybe that vision is just to push the war forward, so to speak, not one side over the other. Maybe that's just how God has to communicate with people sometimes. It's not changing the outcome. It's kind of furthering the outcome. Let's continue on page 115. He's still talking to the Horsemen. And they're trying to get a sense of who each other are. Mainly, the Horseman wants to get a sense of who Santiago is. He's got the sword. He's got the big horse. He's the guy who's asking the questions. And he's kind of talking to him. What is a stranger doing in this strange land? And he says, well, I'm following my personal legend. And the Horseman tells him, well, I had to test your courage. That's why I had to pull out my sword, cause you to bleed a little bit, scare you, have the thundering sound. Because he says courage is the most essential quality to understanding the language of the world. And I want to further that by saying what he's probably saying here is that courage is the most essential quality to understanding, but the most essential quality to obtaining your personal treasure. I think you could use courage for both of these things. Look at what I wrote here. Remember one of the episodes I told you guys about this book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. And look at what the Horseman also tells Santiago here. You got to love the desert, but don't trust it, because it's going to test you and it's going to challenge you, and it could kill you if you get distracted. The challenges are leading you in the right direction. And don't lose focus, or you might lose that path. So they go about their ways. They kind of wrap up this conversation. Horseman rides away. And Santiago mentions this right here on page 116. The boy had met the alchemist. That's the sentence right there. That's the sentence. The hand with the whip pointed to the south. The boy had met the alchemist. So let me get this straight. This is the same alchemist that the Englishman met. Does it sound like the same alchemist that the Englishman met? The Englishman, remember, his encounter with the alchemist was very disappointing in his eyes because the alchemist didn't tell him anything new. He asked him, how do I turn, this metal into gold? And the guy said, well, try it. How simple. You come across the whole desert just for that. The simple yet but powerful words from the alchemist. Now, this guy's the alchemist. That's what I didn't get. I definitely had a vision of the alchemist that he was somebody elderly, small, physically weak, mentally sharp, beard, kind of looking like Gandalf or like a wizard, somebody like that. Because remember, we saw the alchemist in the beginning, the preface. We met him briefly when the caravan arrived at the oasis, and then the Englishman ended up meeting him. So we haven't learned too much about it, and then all of a sudden this guy comes in on a horse. I didn't quite, it kind of caught me by surprise that this guy is an alchemist. Is it the same alchemist or is it a different one? We know that there are other alchemists out there, but this one is particularly special, the one at the oasis. Let's continue on page 116. This is where the battle begins, and 500 tribesmen enter into the oasis. And these are the enemy tribesmen. And at first it seems peaceful. They're kind of just walking around. They're not doing much. Then they attack one of the tents. And thankfully it was empty, probably because of they told the women and children to shelter in place somewhere at another part of the oasis so they don't get hurt. And now it's full-on war. And it's really a slaughter. It's really one-sided. The oasis army seems like they handled these 500 tribesmen pretty easily. They actually say the only one that survives for a second is the commander of the army. He's captured and he's brought before the chieftains. And the chieftains condemn him to death. So really, the 500 tribesmen dwindle down to zero, almost like it was nothing. And they condemn him to death for breaking that sacred tradition of the oasis. Remember, war is not to take place at an oasis. That is a neutral ground. People aren't allowed to have guns there. When people come in, the oasis is responsible for taking care of them. Well, now they had to go into like DEFCON 4 upon the vision of Santiago. They gave everybody back their guns, right? They put out basically like bounties for killing enemies. They shut the whole thing down. And that just does not fly with these tribal chieftains. So they condemn this guy to death for it. And this was where I was talking about the pay. So Santiago, the tribal chieftain, presents Santiago with 50 pieces of gold. And he asks him actually to become the counselor of the oasis. Very interesting. Offers him a job and then a down payment for his good performance in battle. Let's continue on. Santiago goes and he's going to meet with the alchemist again. This is on page 117 about... And the alchemist appears with 2 hawks that they are about to cook up. One thing, would you eat a hawk? I haven't heard of very many people eating hawks. Chickens, turkeys, yeah. But hawks, I don't know. Bird of prey, they got a different digestive tract probably. Yeah, I don't know. Well, no, other birds are omnivorous too. Like they eat worms and bugs and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Also, are these the two hawks? Are these the same hawks that Santiago had a vision about? Very interesting. It's not very clear yet on if that is the case. So he goes into the alchemist's tent, and again, this guy is the alchemist. But the tent does not have anything that you would expect an alchemist to have. There's no chemistry sets, crazy lab experiments going on. There are books, but other than that, Santiago is kind of wondering, like, hey, this guy's an alchemist. He doesn't really have any alchemist-like things. And maybe he doesn't need it because he is full of information, full of knowledge. And he obviously knows quite a bit. He quotes the old king about the universal conspiracy, about the whole universe conspires to help somebody obtain their personal treasure. And he knows enough to say to Santiago that he's going to point him in the right direction of where his treasure is, of the pyramids. Santiago kind of pushes back saying, hey, I already have treasures. I had a sheep. I have a family back home. I got Fatima. And he said they do not add up to the pyramid. Do not lose sight of that. And again, the theme of the book being very religious, there's a quote here, which I do remember from the Bible, from the Gospels. It's not what enters men's mouth that's evil. I read this like it was my quote, or it was a quote from the book, but it's not what enters men's mouths that's evil. It's what comes out of their mouths that defiles them. I remember reading that in the Gospels, New Testament. A lot of biblical messages in the book. So, Alchemist is going to show Santiago the way. And they start to prepare. One of the preparations, Santiago first, he's got to trade his camel for a horse. Or not his camel, but a camel for a horse. Horse is going to fare way better out in the desert. And then, when they're in the desert, you got to look for signs of life. Because only those who can see such signs of life are able to find treasure. And the horseman, or the alchemist says, life attracts life. Kind of sounds accurate. I mean, think about like your mindset on things. If you have a certain positive mindset, well, things could end up working out for you. Because it's not that your mind changes things, but it changes you and the actions you take. So if you're full of life, if you're full of positivity, if you're full of treasure, and you see the treasures in your own life, well, then that'll attract other treasures. But you got to put action into it. It's not that it's magic, although it kind of seems like it. Anyway, page 121, we get a very interesting turn of events here. They're in this desert, right? They've left already, and they're in the desert. They're searching among the stones for life. The alchemist finds a hole, sticks his whole arm down it. Probably not a good idea, because you could probably guess what is going to be down there. He leaps up, and out of the hole comes his whole arm's holding a snake. So his arm and a snake. And it sounds like a little fierce little tussle going on. But he places the snake in a circle. And the snake immediately calms down. Right away. And the alchemist says he won't leave the circle. You found life in the desert, the omen that I needed. Why was that so important, asked Santiago. Because the pyramids are surrounded by the desert. Kind of sounds like the argument from Idiocracy. What's got what plants crave? What do plants crave? Electrolytes. Where do you get electrolytes? Brondo. What's Brondo? It's what plants crave. Right? You found life in the desert. Why is that important? Because the pyramids are surrounded by the desert. Seems like you could just get into a circular argument about it, but why? What is the significance of this snake out of nowhere? And then to get put in the circle, immediately calms down. It's like, the alchemist is thinking this is a good sign. It means we are closer to the treasure. But I'm still having trouble finding the connection that the cobra has in all this. Let's continue on. Santiago doesn't want to keep going forward. He says that he already has his treasure. Fatima is his treasure. And remember, Fatima is the one that kind of pushed him to go forward. Go pursue your personal treasure. If you end up coming back, then we'll get married. Then we will be together. It'll all work out, but you can't have it without the personal treasure. And this seems like a tradition amongst the people of the oasis. Men have to go find their personal treasure, and the women are staying behind. Staying at the oasis. And Santiago asks him, well, what if I don't go to pursue my treasure? I don't really need this, do I? And the alchemist starts to explain to him, okay, yeah, you don't have to go, and you'll still obtain wealth, and you'll marry Fatima. Things will work out. And then in the second year, you'll remember that, oh yeah, there was this treasure. And the omens are still going to bother you about it. You'll still see the omens. Third year, the omens are going to continue. You'll probably start to feel a little like, maybe I should have gone. In the third year, Fatima is also going to start to feel guilty. She's going to feel guilty that she held you back from your treasure. And then in the fourth year, the omens aren't even going to appear anymore. And you're going to realize that it's become too late to pursue that legend. And it's said in the book by the alchemist, love never keeps a man from his personal legend. Amen to that. You don't want regret. We've talked about regret a little bit. You do not want regret. So Santiago lets Fatima know that he is leaving. Okay. I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. So they didn't actually leave at this slide when I was talking about preparations. Yes, they are preparing. He's got to get the camel, trade it for a horse. The cobra is like a good omen. And then the explanation of what's going to happen if he doesn't pursue his treasure. Then he's got to go tell Fatima he's leaving. So then after this, then they leave. So there was a few different meetings with the alchemist. Meets him at the tent. Meets him out in the oasis initially. So they haven't left yet. So that's my fault. So they meet outside the tent. They kind of walk around a little bit. Fatima wants him to go. We were just talking about this. She realizes that he needs to pursue his legend in order to not have all this regret later on in life. Also, it's probably, a little bit of a sexual selection. A man who pursues his personal legend, treasure, more attractive. You've proven yourself. Think about all these like hunter-gatherer tribes that are very few left, but I've heard of one, I think South America, that in order for a boy to become a man, they have to dip their hands in these like mittens made out of leaves that contain like these fire ants that just bite them and bite them. And maybe the desert and the personal treasure represent something similar, how you transition from a boy to a man. Now, the journey with the alchemist begins on page 127. Yeah, I got a little confused with my notes there, but they finally, now they finally leave, guys. I swear this time, they've actually gone. So the horseman, I keep calling him the horseman. The alchemist says, don't think about what you left behind. Move forward. The soul of the world does not forget. You don't really leave it behind. Save it for a later date. What has will be again, and everything will come back around full circle, I think is what the alchemist is trying to tell Santiago here. Because Santiago, he wants to go back. He loves Fatima. But the alchemist is kind of reassuring here and saying, it's all going to work out. Believe me. Remember the falcon that the alchemist had? He kind of hunts for, I just wrote this little point here. The falcon kind of helped him out. Hunted some game for them out in the desert. 7 days pass. And Santiago gets a little disappointed. He hasn't really learned anything from the alchemist. 7 days have passed and he still doesn't have his treasure. Might be getting a little antsy. What did I get myself into? He felt this way too when the Englishman, remember he was reading the books and he wasn't quite getting what the books were trying to tell him because the books were written in a code. And he was kind of disappointed, like, why can't they just come out and tell me about this emerald tablet and the masterwork, the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone? And the alchemist tells him kind of something, and this is what kind of maybe would lead somebody to think that this alchemist is truly the alchemist that the Englishman met. Because he tells him that action is the only way to learn. Similarly to when the Englishman was kind of looking for a get out of jail free card and like an easy button. I'm going to go talk to this alchemist. He's going to give me the formula. He's going to give me the book, the steps. The alchemist tells the Englishman, you just got to try it. And that kind of relates here to what he tells Santiago. Hey, action is the only way to learn. And on page 129, he continues talking to Santiago and saying, if you're only looking for gold, then that's what you will find. Do you guys remember when they were searching for the alchemist when they first got to the oasis? They were asking people, hey, where's the alchemist? Well, nobody knows what that is. And the Englishman has this bright idea, okay, hey, we got to ask a different question here. Where is somebody that interprets dreams? And then they start getting data like, oh, yeah, that guy, he's at the corner of the oasis. Because the people there are more familiar with that. They don't know what an alchemist is. So if you're only looking for gold, then that's what you will find. Right? People who seek the treasure of their legend without wanting to actually live out the legend are a lost people. They don't get the point of the treasure. The real treasure is probably the journey en route to the destination. It's not what's at the destination. And then the alchemist shares with Santiago what was written on the emerald tablet. Remember, the Englishman first introduced this to Santiago back when they were riding in on the caravan on their way to the oasis, and he writes what it's all about in the sand, and it's in a code. And the alchemist says it's like the flight of those two hawks. Can't be understood by reason alone. So it's something more than that. Words can't describe it. What is it? And is this somehow related to the themes of this book, the masterwork, the personal treasure? Maybe the Emerald Tablet tells a person exactly how to get their personal treasure. I know it has more to do with alchemy from what the Englishman was describing. In those on page 130 here, in those times the masterwork could be written simply on an emerald, but men began to reject simple things. Yes, and to write tracts, interpretations, and philosophical studies. They also began to feel like they knew a better way than others had, yet the Emerald Tablet is still alive today. So we complicate things. What I think he's trying to say here is that it's really simple. Let's not complicate it with tracts, interpretations. No. Everything's written by the same hand, right? That's what we learned earlier. And you can't reason, it can't be understood by reason alone. It transcends that. There's a feeling, there's something in the air. It's like the flight of the hawks. Why did you get that vision? I don't know. How did you get it? Let's just cut to the true meaning of what do you think this means? Let's not complicate it and figure out the physics on how a vision was transmuted through the ether to your brain. No, go and tell the tribal chieftains there's a war about to happen. We got to start to get ready. People seek out the treasure of their legend without wanting to actually live out the legend. Probably takes a lot of responsibility, a lot of guts to do that. And you don't get the treasure without sacrifice. And that may be why people don't want to live out that legend. They don't want that responsibility on their shoulders. I'm just an idea. Guys, that was it. Page 130. For next time, let's continue on this pace that we've been doing. Let's go page 130, like 131. I guess it would be 131 through 150 for next time. And this will be just next week, 7 days from now. Thank you very much for listening. I got 6 subscribers on BitChute, and I got my first subscriber on YouTube. Pretty cool. We'll see where it goes. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you have any questions or have any comments on this book, add your own thoughts, please. Write in the comments and let's talk about it. For that, my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. I will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.